There is a version of this story where nothing happens. Where two boys grow up 3 houses apart, where one leaves for the world and the other stays behind fixing screen doors and ringing up paint cans, where a joke that started when they were 12 years old stays exactly that, a joke, safe and harmless, something to laugh about at reunions when they're both gray and married to other people. This is not that version. This is the story of a going-away party that lasted 4 minutes too long. Of a porch light left on for a boy who said he wasn't coming back. Of a cassette tape buried in a drawer for 11 years, waiting for someone brave enough to press play. It begins, like most true things do, with 2 people pretending they don't feel what they feel, and it ends with one of them finally telling the truth out loud, in front of everyone, with nothing left to lose. They called it a joke because the alternative was terrifying. They were wrong. It was never a joke. It was the truest thing either of them ever said. Eli Marsh had a theory that every friendship needed a running joke to survive, the way a house needed a foundation. His and Jude's had started in 7th grade, when a substitute teacher misread the seating chart and called them the Marsh-Calloway household, and a girl 2 rows back had snorted so hard milk came out of her nose. After that, it stuck. Somewhere along the way, the Marsh-Calloway household became married, became a bit they performed for anyone who'd laugh, Jude draping an arm around Eli's shoulders and announcing, "This is my husband, isn't he handsome?" Eli rolling his eyes and playing along because it was easier than examining why his stomach did something complicated every time. 10 years later, the bit hadn't changed. Only the town had gotten smaller, or maybe Eli had just stopped growing into it. He was 26, elbow deep in a crate of hinges behind the counter of Marsh Hardware, his father's store, soon to be his, whether he wanted that or not, when the bell over the door jangled and Jude Calloway walked in looking like he always did, like trouble that had learned to smile first. "You're closing in 10 minutes, Jude said, "and I need a favor." "You need a favor or you need someone to talk you out of something?" "Same thing, usually." Jude leaned on the counter, and up close Eli could see the faint shadows under his eyes that 3 cups of gas station coffee hadn't fixed. Jude had been packing for 2 weeks. In 4 days he'd be gone, a 6-city tour opening for a band whose name Eli still hadn't memorized, the first real break after 6 years of playing bars for tip jars and gas money. It was everything Jude had wanted since he was 15 and first picked up his uncle's old guitar. It was also, Eli understood without either of them saying it, the end of something. Not the friendship. Just, the shape of it. The easy, daily, 3 houses apart shape of it. "I need you to come to the thing tonight," Jude said. "The going away thing. Everyone's asking if my husband's coming. I hate that joke." "You've hated that joke for 10 years and you've never once stopped playing along." Eli didn't have a good answer for that, because it was true, and because the truth had teeth he didn't want to look at too closely. So he said what he always said. "I'll come. Someone has to make sure you don't cry into the guacamole again." That was one time. I was 17 and Marcy DeLuca said she was moving to Ohio. "You cried for 40 minutes. She was very important to me at the time." Eli almost smiled. Almost. There was a version of himself, younger, less careful, who would have said something reckless right then, standing in the dying light of a store that smelled like sawdust and machine oil, the space between them small enough to close in 1 step. Instead he said, 10 minutes. I have to cash out the register, and watched Jude's face do something quick and unreadable before he grinned again and let the moment pass, the way they always did. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, that this might be the last ordinary evening they'd ever have. The Callaways' backyard was strung with lights that had been up since Jude's sister's wedding 2 summers ago, and nobody had ever taken them down, and Eli had always found something quietly beautiful in that, the idea of leaving the good things lit, just in case you needed them again. He arrived late on purpose, the way he always did, so he could stand at the edge of things and watch before anyone noticed him. Jude was in the middle of the yard, laughing at something, a red cup in his hand he probably wasn't drinking from, and for a moment Eli just let himself look. Jude had a way of taking up a room without trying, not loud, exactly, just present, like weather. "There's my other half," Jude called when he spotted him, and the small crowd around him laughed, and someone yelled finally, "The husband arrives," and Eli lifted a hand in a wave that felt more like surrender. The night went the way these nights went. Old stories. A slideshow someone had made without permission, full of pictures that made Jude groan and hide his face and made Eli's chest ache in a way he didn't examine. At some point Jude's mother pulled Eli aside, the way she'd been doing since he was 14 and his own mother had left, and said, the way she always did, "You'll look after him from a distance, won't you?" Eli said yes. He always said yes. By 11, the crowd had thinned to the two of them and a cooler of half-melted ice, sitting on the porch steps the way they had 100 times before, shoulders almost touching. "For days," Jude said, staring at the string lights instead of at Eli. "4 days. You gonna miss me?" "I'm gonna miss having someone to complain about the customers to." "That's not what I asked." Eli looked at him then, and something in Jude's face was different, not the performance face, not the bit. Something quieter and more frightened underneath it, like a door left open a crack. "Yeah," Eli said, and his voice came out lower than he meant it to. "I'm gonna miss you." "Obviously." "Obviously," Jude repeated, and there was a beat, 1 full second where neither of them said anything, where the joke that had carried them for 10 years sat between them with nowhere left to hide, and then Jude leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't the bit. It wasn't a performance for anyone. It was soft and a little uncertain and it tasted like the last of somebody's cheap beer, and Eli's whole body went still with the shock of finally getting the thing he'd spent a decade pretending not to want. He kissed back for exactly 3 seconds before panic caught up with him. "Jude." Jude pulled back first, already reading it on Eli's face. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, I get it." "That's not," Eli stood up too fast, the porch step creaking under him. "You're leaving in 4 days." "I know." "So what was that?" Jude looked at him for a long moment, and something closed in his expression, gentle but final, like a hand pulling a curtain. "It was me finally saying the thing I've been not saying for 10 years, he said. "Forget it. It's fine. We'll go back to the bit." But they both knew, standing there under lights that never got taken down, that there was no going back to the bit. Some jokes, once you tell the truth inside them, stop being funny forever. Eli didn't sleep that night, or the next. He told himself it was nerves about the store. His father had a cardiologist appointment that week, the kind of appointment that made a 58-year-old man start talking about when this is yours in a tone that turned Eli's future into a life sentence he'd never agreed to. That was easier to think about than the shape of Jude's mouth, or the 3 seconds Eli had kissed him back before fear won. He almost went to the Callaways twice. Both times he stood on his own porch, keys in hand, and then went back inside, because what was he supposed to say? "I've loved you since we were 14 and I've never said it because I was scared of exactly this, of it being real, of everyone in this town looking at me different, of my father's face, of losing you in some bigger way than distance if it went wrong." None of that fit into a doorway conversation. On the 3rd day, Jude texted him. "Can we talk before I go?" Eli stared at it for 11 minutes before he wrote back. "Yeah." They met at the beach where they used to go as teenagers, the one with the broken lifeguard chair nobody had ever replaced. Jude was already there when Eli arrived, hood up against the wind, looking out at water the color of old nickel. "I'm not going to apologize for kissing you," Jude said, before Eli had even sat down. "I'm done apologizing for things I don't regret. I didn't ask you to. You looked like you wanted to." Eli sat down in the sand, a careful 2 feet away, and made himself say the true thing instead of the safe thing, because Jude was leaving in 1 day and safe things had gotten them exactly nowhere in 10 years. "I kissed you back," he said. "For 3 seconds before I panicked. That wasn't about not wanting it, Jude. I've wanted it so long I don't remember what it felt like not to." Jude turned to look at him properly for the first time. "Then why?" "Because you're leaving tomorrow for something you've wanted your whole life, and I'm about to inherit a hardware store in a town where my dad still calls Mr. Abernathy's nephew a slur under his breath and thinks nobody hears him. Because if I let myself have this, really have it, not the bit, not the joke, and then you're on a bus 6 states away in a world that's finally opening up for you, I don't know how I survive being the guy who got left behind twice. Twice, Jude said quietly. My mother left when I was 9. I know it's not the same. But I built my whole life around not needing anything I could lose that badly again. And you're the only thing I never managed to do that with. So yeah. I panicked. Because you're the one thing I was never able to protect myself from, and now you're leaving, and I don't know how to hold both those facts at once. The wind took a long time to fill the silence after that. Finally Jude said, I'm not your mother. And I'm not leaving because of you, I'm leaving because I have to know if I can do the thing I've worked for since I was 15. But I've been in love with you since we were kids playing a joke that stopped being a joke for me somewhere around sophomore year, and I don't know how to keep pretending that isn't true just because the timing's inconvenient. So what do we do? I don't know, Jude admitted. I really don't. But I'd rather know the truth and figure it out than keep laughing at a joke that was breaking both our hearts. They didn't solve it that day. They sat on the sand until the tide came in far enough to soak their shoes, and they didn't touch, and when Jude finally stood to leave he said, the offer's still open. Whenever you're ready to stop being scared. And then he was gone, and Eli sat alone with the water until it was too dark to see it. The first month, they texted constantly, the easy stuff, the safe stuff, tour photos, and bad venue Wi-Fi complaints, Eli sending pictures of increasingly absurd items his father insisted on stocking. It was almost like nothing had changed, except for the 4 days they'd both stopped replying to something and the ache underneath every message that neither of them named. The second month, Jude's texts got shorter. Eli told himself it was exhaustion, 6 cities became 10, became a support slot on a bigger tour, became the kind of opportunity that ate a person's whole day. He didn't let himself think about anything else. He didn't let himself look too hard at the photo someone tagged Jude in from a Nashville green room, another man's arms slung easy around his shoulders, because jealousy over a friendship photo made him feel unhinged, and because he had no right to it. He hadn't said yes. He hadn't said anything. His father's heart appointment came back with a word, arrhythmia, that made the future close and tighter, a manageable condition that nonetheless made his father start saying when the store's yours like a countdown instead of a someday. Eli spent his evenings doing inventory in a building that smelled like his whole life, wondering when exactly he'd agreed to want this. He almost called Jude a dozen times. Each time, he put the phone down. Some part of him had decided, in the silence after the beach, that fairness meant not asking Jude to choose between the tour and a maybe, and so he said nothing, and mistook his own silence for kindness instead of what it actually was, the same old fear wearing a nicer coat. By the 3rd month, the texts had thinned to birthday reminder frequency. Eli told himself that was fine. He told himself a lot of things that spring. His father asked him to clean out the storage loft above the store, years of receipts and dead stock nobody had touched since before Eli was born. It was there, behind a box of rusted padlocks, that Eli found the cassette tape. It had no label except a single word in handwriting he recognized instantly, even faded, Eli. He didn't own anything that played cassettes. He drove into the city 40 minutes away to buy a second-hand tape deck from a pawn shop, telling the version of himself that asked why does this matter so much that he was simply curious. He was not simply curious. His hands shook putting the tape in. It was a song. One voice, one guitar, recorded badly on what sounded like a bedroom setup, a boy's voice not yet finished cracking into the man's voice Eli knew now. Jude, 16 years old, singing something he'd clearly never meant anyone to hear, about a friend he was scared to lose by wanting too much, about a joke that had started as armor and become the only honest thing he knew how to say. The lyrics didn't use Eli's name. They didn't have to. Eli sat on the floor of the storage loft for a long time after the tape clicked off. He called Jude's aunt, who still lived 2 streets from the Marsh house, because something about the handwriting made him ask instead of assume. She told him what he hadn't known, that 16-year-old Jude had recorded the song the week Eli's mother left, terrified and 13 and not knowing what to do with the fact that he was in love with his best friend at the exact moment that friend's whole world had cracked open, so instead of saying anything, he'd written it into a song and asked his aunt to keep it safe, for someday, if I ever get brave enough, and then, over the years, forgotten to ask for it back, or been too afraid to. It hadn't been a joke that turned real at a going-away party. It had been real for 11 years, hidden in a shoebox, waiting. He listened to the tape 4 more times that night, and somewhere in the second listen he stopped hearing it as a message from the past and started hearing it as a question aimed directly at him. Right now, are you going to keep being the reason this stays a secret? He thought about his father's countdown voice. He thought about the town, and the store, and every reason he'd built for staying small and careful. He thought about a 9-year-old watching his mother's car turn the corner and deciding, without ever saying it out loud, that wanting things too much was how you got hurt. He thought about 3 seconds of kissing Jude back before fear won, and about 4 months of silence he'd mistaken for kindness, and he understood, sitting alone on a dusty floor with a tape deck and a decade-old confession, that fear dressed up as consideration was still just fear. He didn't call. He didn't text. He bought a bus ticket. The venue was small, a converted warehouse in a city Eli had never been to, and he stood at the back of a crowd of strangers who all seemed to know the words to songs Eli had only heard secondhand through phone videos. Jude looked different on stage, sure, lit up in a way the town had never quite let him be, and Eli's chest hurt with how proud he was, underneath all the fear. He almost lost his nerve twice. He stayed anyway. After the set, he found his way backstage by saying Jude's name to enough people that eventually someone believed him, and then Jude rounded a corner with a guitar case in one hand and stopped dead in the hallway like he'd walked into glass. Eli. I found the tape, Eli said, before either of them could retreat into something easier. The one you gave your aunt. I know it wasn't a joke. I know it was never a joke, not for you, not since we were kids, and I am so sorry it took me 11 years and a beach conversation and 4 months of silence to catch up to something you knew when you were 16. Jude set the guitar case down slowly, like his hands needed something to do besides shake. Why now? Because I spent my whole life deciding that wanting things too much was how you lost them. And I think I've been losing you slowly anyway, by being too careful to ever really have you. Eli took a breath that felt like the first real one in months. I'm not asking you to give up the tour. I'm asking if there's a version of this where I stop being scared of you seeing how much I actually want this. Want you. However that has to look, with the distance, with the store, with all of it. I'd rather figure that out with you than keep being safe without you. For a long moment Jude didn't say anything, and Eli's heart did something violent and hopeful and terrified all at once, and then Jude crossed the hallway in 2 steps and kissed him, and this time neither of them pulled away after 3 seconds. This time it lasted until someone's tour manager cleared his throat loudly and told them to get a room, and they both laughed against each other's mouths, and it was the best sound Eli had heard in 4 months. It wasn't simple after that. Nothing true ever is. Eli went home. Jude finished the tour. They talked every night, properly now, no more careful silences, about Eli's father, who took the news better than Eli expected and worse than he'd hoped, landing somewhere in the difficult, workable middle that most real acceptance actually lives in, about Jude's fear that distance would wear Eli down the way it had worn down every fragile thing in his childhood, about what it would look like to build something between 2 lives that didn't automatically match up. They didn't solve everything with 1 kiss in a hallway. Eli kept the store, because he found, once he stopped resenting it as a life sentence, that he actually loved the place, the customers, the smell of it, the version of his father who softened when Eli started asking to run the books instead of being handed them. Jude kept touring, 6 weeks on, 2 weeks home, a rhythm that took work and video calls and a lot of trust neither of them had practiced much of before. It was harder than the bit had ever been. It was also, for the first time in 10 years, entirely honest, and Eli discovered that honesty, even the difficult kind, was a weight lighter than any joke he'd ever hidden behind. A year later, the Callaways' backyard lights were still up, they'd never been taken down, same as always, strung for another party, this one smaller, just family and the handful of people who'd known them both since they were 12 years old, and a substitute teacher had accidentally told the truth before either of them could. Someone, inevitably, made the old joke. "Here comes the husband." Eli didn't roll his eyes this time. He crossed the yard, took Jude's hand in front of everyone who'd spent a decade laughing at something that had been real the whole time, and said, loud enough for the whole yard to hear, "Actually, working on making that not a joke anymore." Jude's face did something Eli would remember for the rest of his life, surprised and unguarded and lit up brighter than any stage light, and then he laughed, and pulled Eli in, and kissed him under the lights that had never once gone dark. In front of the whole town that used to make them afraid to be honest. It wasn't a proposal, not yet. It was a promise. It was two people who'd spent 10 years hiding the truest thing they knew inside a joke, finally saying it plainly, out loud, with nothing left to protect themselves from. Some titles make a promise. This one had taken 11 years to keep. It was never just a joke. It was the truest thing they'd ever said, they just needed the courage to stop laughing long enough to hear it.